everybody, and thank y'all so much again for joining us here on Expanded Perspectives with me, Cam Hale, and I'm not alone. Joining me today, my distinguished guest, a man of great renown, Big Fizzy.
How's it going, everybody? Yes, I'm here in Skeleton Studios, coming back from a little illness.
You don't look any better.
Well, no, and I haven't felt any better either. This time of year, the kids start school again, and they always end up mingling and bringing something home. Luke came home and didn't feel very good, and I think he passed it on to me, and so I've been under the weather for a couple days. But I try to look at the bright side of things. Hey, look, this is a good test for my immune system. You know, if you keep charging up your immune system, you'll be better off in the long run. So it's good to get a little sickness every once in a while.
AG1.
Yeah, well, that helps for sure.
Right, for sure.
That definitely helps. But
sure.
When everybody was stuck in their house during the COVID panic, that was really bad for your immune system.
Yeah.
To never interact with another human. I like to eat with my fingers. I lick them and stuff. I lick door handles. And
That's right.
Open windows with my mouth. I like to do that stuff to keep my immune system fully charged.
Lick doorknobs at the hospital.
Yeah.
You just got to make sure you're staying healthy.
No, don't do that, folks. This is all jokes.
Absolutely do not do that.
No, man, I've been good, though. I wish it would cool off a little more.
Man,
it's
we
been
got
hot, but
we kind of got.
We had a week of bad weather.
We did, and then we got a runaround of where they said, all right, it's all good. Now it's going to be cool. And then turns out it came back and got hot again.
Yeah, man, enough.
I'm tired of the summer. I don't mind it being warm. Let me rephrase that. I love the summer when it's in the 90s.
Yeah.
I don't need it to be 111 for X amount of days straight.
We had like 8 days where it said it was going to rain every day for 8 days, and we got absolutely zero rain.
Zip, zero, zilch.
Is there not a better job than to be a meteorologist? I mean, you could be wrong all the time, and then nothing happens. You're just like, yeah, well, I'm surprised it's still a thing, right? You just look at your app.
I want to take a job like that because just like you said, everybody looks at who watches it anymore? Now, you used to
My mom and dad, that's who. That's who watches the news. They wait for the weather.
Why does Pop need to know what the weather's going to be like? It's not like he's got anything big planned outside.
Exactly. Neither does my mother.
Like, what are y'all doing?
Why do they care? They got to know.
Because if they didn't, they'd be calling you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? They'd have you, which you need to go. We need to go. First of all, we got to go see Pop already because we got to pick up a stand out there.
Oh, I already got it.
Oh, okay. Good. Because he's the turkey whisperer.
Yeah, I just saw one the other day. 2 days ago, I was at their place, and there was like 6 of them just huddled there in the yard.
I don't know how he does it. I have no idea how he does it. It's just like little do they know, if he could get to a weapon, they wouldn't be there anymore. That's the trouble. Hey, Brud, I got something to share with you. Now, I personally believe Lon likes to write headlines that he knows are going to grab my attention.
Yeah,
right?
Sure. Of course.
Because he messes with me. And I saw this, and I knew I had to share it because of the headline. But I knew you would like it too when I read this. This is what the headline reads. I saw an insectoid.
Okay, already starting off good.
In a tux, a top hat, and a cane.
What?
Get a load of it. Happened in 1980 in Amsterdam, New York. Says it was a hot summer afternoon in Amsterdam, and I was living with my mom in a trailer house, and it was right off the main route. We were the first trailer in the trailer park. This was on June 9th, 1980. The front door and the back door were almost across from one another, and I had both main wooden doors open and the screen doors were closed. There's a small deck off the back door and the front door. I was alone at the time. My mom had gone out to run a few errands. I was making coffee at the counter. This counter jutted out into the kitchen, leaving the front door easily in my sight to the right, and the back door just slightly past my peripheral vision on the left. No television, no music, no neighbors, just in there. Now, out of the corner of my left eye, I saw movement at the back door. Now, when I looked, I saw a 6-foot-tall, grasshopper-like being that was wearing a tuxedo with tails, a top hat, and a black cane with a carved bone-like knob. It knocked on the back screen door. I looked back at my coffee cup in disbelief, turned to look again, and it was still there. As it cocked its head, I looked away again in fear.
As it cocked its head, I cocked my 12 gauge.
That's right.
Right?
I racked the slide. I turned to look one final time and saw it was still there, and that's the last I remember. The whole event only took moments. I moved to Los Angeles in January of 1980 and had no memory of this event. I didn't tell my mom anything when she came home that day. I don't remember anything more from that day. It wasn't until I was in college that I remembered this. It came back as clear as it was that day, not over time, but all at once. I began telling the story to my close friends, but there was always part of me that questioned whether it happened or not. See, I'm an artist. Maybe I made it up. I don't know. But the detail was too clear. And then I rented the video Communion. I'm sure you know the premise of that movie as well as its location. When I saw the alien wearing the tux, the top hat, and the cane, well, I damn near fell out of my chair. It was like being hit with a brick. What are the odds of that? There's no way we both dreamed up the same being with those odd details. This is not your standard gray. I think it's important to note that the movie came out after my encounter. My purpose in writing this is to add my story to the records, but more importantly, I would really like to know if anyone else has seen this, or if they remember anything more about their encounter. I would really like to know what happened that afternoon after my third and final glance. My rebooted memory stops at the third glance, but I got a feeling like that was not the end of the story. So please let me know if you've heard of anything like this, and thank you for all the information you hold and facilitate. R.
Wow. I was going to say before, you're about halfway through reading that, I was like, well, I don't think it's an insectoid. I think it's something disguising itself to look something like it's friendly, but it wasn't that. But then he moved on into alien abduction and the movie Communion. Now, I don't remember in the movie Communion, it's been a hot minute since I've seen that. Was there a scene where one of the Greys was dressed in a tuxedo and top hat? I don't remember that.
I don't remember either. I
do remember when I read that book and then later saw the movie with Christopher Walken that it was kind of hard to go to sleep for about 3 weeks. I mean,
Yes.
that movie's creepy, right?
Yes.
I don't know.
It's a terribly creepy film.
But that's what it sounds like to me. It sounds like false memories were placed into that person's brain. That's why they forgot about it and stuff. And I believe that they were probably abducted, right? So it sounds like.
It definitely seems like it. Now, what's still so crazy is why would it show up as a giant insect?
Well, I think that they probably disguised themselves not knowing that that's ludicrous. You know what I'm saying?
They might.
Like they don't understand. So they just be like, oh, well, we'll just make ourselves look like that, not knowing that that's not normal. You know what I mean? Like this is just a theory,
But also
of course.
the idea of seeing a 6-foot-tall grasshopper in a tux with tails and a top hat and a cane is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I would definitely probably go seek out a psychotherapist or something. I think I was losing my brain. Losing my mind, not losing my brain.
I would like to know what triggered it to come back all at one time.
I don't know. Maybe the trance they put him under, wore off or something.
That was the extent. Yeah, maybe.
I don't know. Check this out. It says, I've never told anyone this or talked about it to anyone else besides the people that were with me that night and my best friend, who claims to have seen him at a different date that I didn't know about until I described my experience to him. I lived in a small town, Bastrop, Louisiana, with my cousin and his wife. Now, there's not much to do in Morehouse Parish, besides drive back roads like we've done thousands of times before. The one night in 2015, we were leaving a church we used to clean. It was around 2 a.m. or so. We were in my cousin's 1990 GMC Sierra, single cab 4x4 pickup truck, and we decided to ride the back roads. So we're cruising, he and I, talking and listening to Nirvana. Probably played music together. Anyways, his wife was asleep in the middle seat when we turned on a paved road 5 miles or so outside of town and come around a curve, and there it was. Something we'd never seen before. Now, I'm an avid hunter. I've been in the woods all hours of night and day. I was also in the Army, but I'd never been more freaked out by something than what we witnessed. There was something dead in the road, and something was eating it when the headlights hit it. It looked up and was about 2.5 to 3 foot tall, like it was kneeling over whatever it was eating. It had red eyes, and it stood up so fast, like a millisecond, and when it did, it was 7 or 8 feet tall. It was pitch black. The skin looked like bat skin, but way darker. In one fell swoop, it leapt, and its wings opened, and it flew up into the woods on the side of the road. It had to be moving over 50 miles an hour. It was the wildest experience of my life, and I've always been cynical when it comes to paranormal stuff, but I know what I saw that night, and so does my cousin. Trust me, I'm a huge cynic of anything paranormal, however you want to classify it. I was freaked out to see what it was eating exactly, and I didn't know. It had what looked like hands, but it had a human-like face with 2 to 3 inch round red eyes, a human-like torso, and legs. The wings had straight, jagged edges. It was moving so fast I only saw the wings for a split second. When it leapt, it only moved its wings. Once it shot through the air like a missile is really the only way I can describe it. But its wingspan was huge. It was at least over one whole lane width of the road, and the woods he flew into was only about 10 foot from the roadside. Thanks for all you do, Sean. So, I mean, is this the Mothman? Is this a gargoyle? It's another one of these flying humanoid
It sounds
sightings.
almost like a gargoyle.
Remember the book a long time ago that Ken Gerhard wrote? What was it? Flying Humanoids? Mm-hmm. And there were several stories of people back on county roads in the South, in Louisiana, in Arkansas, Mississippi, stuff like that, where these large winged humanoids, where people would see them in the, most of the time at night on a deserted road or something. So what is that? Is it the same thing that people are seeing all around Chicago, or are these things everywhere? And just, we get sightings from time to time of people seeing a flying humanoid. And a lot of the times they say the wings aren't really flapping like a bird's, but they're just there.
Yeah, like it's just gliding, but it never lowers in altitude.
Yeah, it reminds me of like Jeepers Creepers and all that stuff, right?
Well, and it's funny you pointed out, I do remember we got several of these gargoyle-like reportings that come from down through Louisiana, and it's strange that they would come down in there.
Yeah, there was even a Batman in the Houston area years ago.
Yep.
Down there by Space City,
The Bat Fella.
The Bat Fella.
The Bat Fella.
Looked like a giant bat, yeah.
I got something that we've talked about numerous times, and we've actually had several write in and ask questions about this, send their things back in. Listen to this. It says, about 13 years ago, I came face to face with a giant animal in San Jose, California. I've only shared this little story with close friends. See, I was cat sitting at my boyfriend's aunt's house. He was in the bathroom, and I walked into the living room, which had a sliding glass door that led into the backyard. It was dark out, and I don't recall the time. I looked over and saw an animal about 6 to 7 foot tall. It had 2 eyes on its hind legs with an arched back, and it had long claws on its paws. Now, its hind legs were short, and it was just a few inches away from the glass looking in at me. Well, I screamed, and it turned around slowly, got down on all fours, and left. So I ran to my boyfriend and told him. So to be honest, at the time, I thought I had seen some giant monster raccoon. My aunt had tons of raccoons in her backyard. We had just seen one by the door. She would feed the stray cats. She had a big kitty litter bucket full of kibble right outside the door. So the raccoons would actually pull the lid off the bucket and just eat away. The animal I saw was standing right by the kibble in the same place we would see the coons. Now, she doesn't do that anymore, and I never told her what I saw. Most likely, she would just think I was crazy. She has a fenced backyard, but it's in a rough shape, and the portion by the front yard was knocked down. So I told a few close friends, and they believed me. I think I even did a Google back then just to find nothing, and I just let it go as a big raccoon. I don't know why, but the past few months it's been bothering me, wondering what that was and what happened that night. I've never heard the term cryptid, never believed in Bigfoot or anything like that, so I started searching online to explain this. The closest thing that I could find online that was close to what I saw was a description of a giant ground sloth. Was this what I saw? But it actually made a lot of sense to me. Now, I've not heard anyone else saying anything like this around here, and I would greatly appreciate it. If you have heard of any stories like mine, please let me know. Thanks, MK. Wow.
Well, it either was a cryptid animal or it was just an escaped pet, like I talk about all the time. I believe there's some narco leader who's got a pet giant sloth, right?
Big baller drug dealers have got all kinds of crazy cryptid animals and all that.
And it got loose.
But there are way more sightings than you would think, or little encounters like this of giant sloths in North America.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong.
Which is weird, which is like what you and I have discussed. Are they real? Or is this just some sort of time slip? Or is this a memory of what used to be in this area?
Right, yeah.
Like a spirit of I don't know. It's very, very interesting.
It is very interesting. Also interesting is the topic I'm going to be covering when we get back from this break. Let's take a break, and when we get back, I'm going to be talking about creepy companions. That's right, folks. Haunted dolls. Stick with us. You're listening to Expanded Perspectives. True tales of creepy dolls have fascinated and terrified people for generations, tapping into our primal fears and the uncanny valley between the intimate and the lifelike. Dolls, often associated with innocence and companionship, become unsettling when they deviate from our expectations. Their glassy eyes seem to hold secrets. Their unmoving faces can hide unknown intentions, and their silence becomes an eerie presence. Dolls' long-standing connection to the supernatural may stem from their historical role in rituals, where they were imbued with spiritual significance or used as vessels for magical intent. Over time, some dolls have been connected to dark forces, and they can carry the weight of negative energy or malevolent spirits, causing eerie occurrences and unexplained phenomena. The belief that dolls can be haunted might be rooted in their human-like appearance, making them conduits for paranormal activity. These stories serve as cautionary tales, reminding us that even the most innocent-looking objects can harbor an unsettling darkness, exploring the depths of our collective fear of the unknown and the supernatural. It's difficult to trace the exact beginning of dolls. Historical examples have been discovered all over the world, demonstrating their unusual development. However, the difficulty often lies in the blurry lines of use for the items. While some early examples have been clearly identified as items designed for play, others are more difficult to trace their original use. Besides their use as toys, dolls have been used as ceremonial items, magical and ritual figures, healing proxies, and teaching tools. Just as dolls have many uses, they have been crafted from almost every material imaginable. Some of the earliest figures which we distinguished as dolls were produced by the Egyptians and date from around 2000 BC. These simple dolls were made from wood and cut into a simple paddle shape. The shape of this type of doll led to the common term paddle dolls to denote this type of toy. In the ancient world, dolls were often dedicated at temples to mark a life passage, such as the transition from childhood to puberty, or even marriage. Such special ceremonial uses have ensured the survival of dolls in shrines. A girl's doll might be dedicated to Aphrodite, the goddess of love, or Hera, the protector of marriage. In her youth, the poetess Sappho dedicated her doll to Aphrodite, later recording the incident. "O Aphrodite, despise not my doll's little purple neckerchief. I, Sappho, dedicate this precious gift to you." The Romans used bone, lead, and terracotta to make dolls. An example of a Roman doll carved from oak was found in a tomb from the 2nd century BC. The doll is impressive, especially for the period during which it was created. Its articulated and mortise and tendon joints at the shoulders, thigh, and even elbow. The artist who created the doll strived for a high degree of realism, and the figure even has a well-carved hairstyle to round out its human resemblance. The relic marks an important stage in the development of the basic shape of dolls. Dolls carried great importance during the Roman Empire. At the annual Saturnalia festival, dolls dedicated to the gods were given to girls at puberty. If a girl passed away, dolls might be offered to the gods of the underworld to help ensure the child's peaceful transition to the world beyond, and perhaps give her companionship on the journey. In a young girl's tomb from the 1st century BC, archaeologists found her dolls along with items to adorn them, including cosmetics. Oddly, the country that has very little historical record of children playing with dolls is China. There are few genuine, antique Chinese dolls that have been recovered, but there is evidence of dolls having magical significance. Widespread magical use may have led to the perception they were ritual items as opposed to playthings. Other parts of Asia have strong traditions involving dolls. In Japan, the Doll Festival, also known as the Festival of the Peach Blossom, is held on the 3rd day of the 3rd month. Traditionally, it's a time for parents to pray for the protection of their children. Girls are given new kimonos and hair ribbons, and a ceremony is held during which the children entertain friends and family with food served on miniature doll dishes. Poor families construct dolls from paper for the festival, but among wealthy families, elaborate dolls and accessories are prominent. Some families add new dolls each year until the girl is grown and married. Many families start purchasing dolls from a time a girl is born, building the collection with each passing year. Eventually, the ceremonial dolls are taken with the girl as part of her dowry. Some families have sets dating back several hundred years. The festival itself is said to be a continuous tradition that dates back to 70 BC. But there are all kinds of different types of dolls. One of the ones I'm sure you're thinking about are voodoo dolls. The doll's made of cloth, usually black in color. There's a painted-on face, and on top of the head, some hair, sometimes fashioned from a yarn or some type of string, and even sometimes human hair. A scrap of clothing is attached to the doll, something obviously cut from another garment. The doll is riddled with pins, fiercely driven into the head, heart, and intimate regions. This is the classic voodoo doll. Voodoo dolls are a vast topic in and of themselves. They are easily the most well-known magical dolls in the world. They also have one of the most confusing origin stories. While many people are still under the impression that voodoo dolls are of strictly African genesis, they are actually a New World creation. Part of their origin, in fact, lies in European tradition, where poppets were used in sympathetic magic to inflict harm on targets. Settlers traveling from various points in Europe carried these ritual concepts with them to the United States during the colonial period and beyond. During the period of the slave trade, a melting pot of cultures was created. Slaves taken from West Africa were thrown together with people from other parts of Africa and the Caribbean. In places like New Orleans, various folk and magical traditions blended together and began to evolve. The idea of European poppets, the concept of African fetishes, and magical practices from Haiti somehow morphed into what's commonly recognized as the modern voodoo doll. There's no doubt the use of dolls for magic took hold with the slaves in the Deep South. The Africans, among them, recognized the idea of an image as a magical focus from their use of baccio in their native land. Baccio are effigies designed to be mediators to the spirit world. Baccio could be used to contact ancestors and deities to obtain several things like protection and healing and other assistance. In this case, the doll, or the baccio itself, was not the source of power. Rather, it was simply a vessel through which communication with other powers could occur. Considering their level of suffering, It wasn't much of a leap for slaves to transition to use the dolls to curse their enemies. Antique dolls from the 18th and 19th centuries have been found on several plantations in Louisiana. They bear some resemblance to the traditional baccio, but they are bound with twine or sometimes catgut and stuck through with pins or small fish bones. By the 1930s and 1940s, movie makers jumped in and started using voodoo dolls as a fearful image and plot device in films about Haitian voodoo, further cementing the connection between the ritual dolls and the island magical traditions. Widespread interest in the occult in the 1960s and 1970s saw the rise in botanics, shops catering to those practicing Afro-Caribbean traditions. By this time, voodoo dolls had become a staple item. An article from the Monday, September 15, 1969 edition of the New York Times gives some insight into the common availability of black rag dolls for magical use. It's titled, "Where Religion and Superstition Mix in the City." It says, "The blending of Christianity and superstition has produced a flourishing business for botanicus, stores that one time sold only herbs, but that today do a thriving business in amulets, stationery, perfumes, and candles. They cater to Puerto Rican, West Indian, Cuban, Dominican, and other believers in espiritismo, or spiritism, which holds that spirits summoned from another world have a direct effect for good or evil. Its roots are deep in religious and beliefs of the African slaves who were brought to the New World, as well as in the practices of the Indians and Spanish and French colonists in the Caribbean. Practitioners of Spiritism say there is a great similarity between their beliefs and those of the traditional religions. They point to angels, devils, saints, and holy spirits as manifestations of the spirit world. Our beliefs are not different," said Carmelo Ramos, who operates a botanica. "We are just traveling different roads to reach the same goals." While Mr. Ramos prefers to cater to persons who are seeking the help of good spirits, he does not turn away those who seek to cast spells or to delve into black magic. For them, he has vials of bat blood, snake oil, graveyard dust, as well as the bones of various animals and candles in a variety of shapes. Mr. Ramos also has black rag dolls at $5 and $6, which are often sold along with gold-plated sewing needles. These needles are stuck into the dolls to cause pain and discomfort to enemies. Voodoo dolls are now known around the world and are firmly attached to voodoo and Haitian and African traditions. In her book, Voodoo Dolls in Magic and Ritual, Denise Alvarado says, "The foremost reigning icon of African-derived religions in the minds of the Western world is the voodoo doll, standing at the crossroads as a psychic link between the world of spirit and the world of the mundane. Voodoo dolls provide a frightening glimpse into the world of the supernatural. Very few things have the potential to create as much fear, panic, and paranoia as the discovery of a voodoo doll lying on the front steps of a home that you live in." Now, today in New Orleans, voodoo dolls are sold in shops all over the city. They are popular novelties, a souvenir of an old tradition from a city that lives and breathes magic and voodoo. I have a personal experience with this. I remember when we were young, my family, we were taking a trip. I don't remember where we were going. I think we were going to Florida. But on the way there, we stopped and spent the night in New Orleans. And I was about 13. No, I was probably about 15, and my brother was about 10. And I remember we went into this crazy voodoo shop, and it was nuts, right? They had all these voodoo dolls on the wall. They had an altar with like this incense burning and candles and lots of skulls and stuff. And, you know, there were necklaces and people were throwing coins and they were praying. And on one wall, they had like a list of spells in these individual packages. And in the package, it reminds me like when you go in the garden section of like your Home Depot or something, and it's springtime and they have all these little packets of seeds for different vegetables. It was like that. Each little package had something in it, some probably just junk. But anyways, they had all these different spells of things that you could have if you bought these voodoo spells. And like some were fertility, some were to get rich, some were for health. And then there were those that were for causing evil to another person. And I remember my little brother had a bully or something that was picking on him, and he specifically bought a spell that would cause harm to his bully. And of course, we laughed and thought it was funny, and he bought the spell. It was like $5 or something. Well, sure enough, like 2 weeks later, that bully that was picking on him broke his arm on the playground at recess. And my brother was convinced it was because of purchasing that spell. Now, I think it was just coincidence, but it was a cool story either way. But West African, Haitian, Dominican voodoo dolls, they're not the only ones. Have you ever heard of Japanese curse dolls? It was September 26, 2017, when a group of children on their way to school found this note. The note said, "All you brats, jump from here and die." It was attached to a straw doll hanging from the railing of a pedestrian land bridge. The implications were clear. Someone wanted the children to meet a terrible end. But who would do that? And who would wish that on children? The straw doll, known in Japan as Awara Ninyo, is similar to a voodoo doll. It's used as an effigy to place a curse of ill fortune or death on its target. Someone was trying to use the power of the doll to make the children leap to their deaths. The incident occurred near the Edogawa Elementary School in Tokyo, and alarmed school officials contacted the police right away. In short order, the authorities traced down the source of doll and note. The guilty party turned out to be a 41-year-old Takeshi Inaba, a man living near the school. When confronted, Inaba told the police, "Those kids running wild in the park, they're too noisy." It's believed Inaba is also responsible for a series of 30 letters sent to parents and staff members of the Edogawa school. The letters complained about the adults' inability to control the noisy kids. Additionally, the man was linked to graffiti found in a local park sprayed on benches and a public toilet. Messages included statements such as, "Kids are too noisy." Inaba is facing charges of criminal intimidation. There's some debate as to whether or not the supernatural threat of the doll is actually criminal. However, in the very least, it's creepy. While Inaba may not face serial legal consequences, he will likely end up spending time with a mental health examiner. The use of straw curse dolls goes far back in Japan's history. They were used both to make wishes and to harm or kill a person. The Nara National Research Institute for Cultural Properties has a relic from the 8th century, recovered at an archaeological dig, a doll made of bound wooden strips with an iron nail shoved through the chest. Some accounts trace them back to Japan's Edo period, which is 1603 to 1868, where it seems that the tradition became more widespread. However, earlier evidence goes back to the Heian period, which is 794 to 1185 CE, when sorcerers utilized dolls for curses. Iron was a rarity at the time, so wooden stakes were used to pierce the dolls. The use of curse dolls is not something taken lightly by traditional Japanese. Using such magic involved more than just grabbing a doll and shoving nails into it. A precise ritual had to be followed for the magic to work correctly. The ritual has to be carried out during the Ushi Mitsu, the old double hour of the ox. This is the period from 1 a.m. to 3 a.m., a time when spirits of the dead, as well as the gods and evil entities, are alive and out roaming about. The gods worshipped by both Buddhist and Shinto adherents can be petitioned at this time. The curse ritual itself is performed at a shrine. While the practice is not openly condoned, many shrines have a reputation for being famous cursing shrines. Kifune Shrine or Kiyomizu Temple in Kyoto are both well known for their long use by those placing curses. Many trees and these shrines show extensive damage from countless nails driven into dolls over the years. It's important that the ritual be kept secret. Special ritual clothing must be worn for the process. A white robe, a white obi or belt, and white paint on the face. Around the breast is placed in a round mirror, and on the hip, a sword is worn for protection. Wooden clogs with only one support are worn, and the person performing the ritual must bite down on a wooden comb, as they are not allowed to speak during the process. Special headgear is also required for the ritual. The headpiece, or gotoku, is essentially the bottom of a tripod, similar to those used in hibiscus, upside down with its feet pointing up. On each of the 3 spokes is a lit candle. The dolls are made from straw, in the shape of a human with arms, legs, torso, and head. The curse is most effective when something belonging to the victim is integrated into the creation of the doll. That could be things like hair, nail clippings, or blood work best, as they all create an energetic connection to the intended target. The doll is taken to a sacred tree at the shrine, where long metal nails, specifically 5-inch nails, and a wooden mallet are used to pin the doll to the tree. The nails are driven into various parts of the doll, usually to represent where harm should befall. For maximum effect, the ritual process can be repeated 7 nights in a row, with the 7th night culminating in a nail through the doll's head and the death of the victim. Even the journey to the shrine must be carried out carefully. If the petitioner meets someone else during the expedition to the shrine, the other innocent person might catch the curse and die instead of the intended victim. There are other risks involved in the ritual too. If someone sees the ritual being performed, there is a risk that the curse can rebound back to the caster. Furthermore, carrying out such a powerful curse and death magic threatens the soul of the caster and may lead to them turning into an oni, or demon. These days, these rituals are still carried out, but with a photograph of the victim's face placed on the head of the doll. Much of the traditional ceremony has been discarded for expedience, but those attempting the magic skill sneak into shrines and nail their curses to sacred trees. In modern Japan, the use of death magic is not considered acceptable. It does, of course, mean such rituals are not carried out. Ritual kits to cast the curse can be purchased online, often found on Amazon, in Japan and other mainstream sites. People caught carrying out these rituals, usually the waranino, are often prosecuted by authorities. A recent case in Kyoto involved a man caught after nailing a straw doll to a sacred tree. He was caught on shrine grounds after hours, and the doll had a photograph of a woman's face attached, along with her name. The nails had been driven into the doll's body to pin it to the tree. After his arrest, the man stated he was angry at the woman after she rejected his attentions. He wanted, he said, to get even with her. Legal arguments against the man's actions include implication that his actions were a form of intimidation and should not be taken lightly. So, if you ever make it out to Japan and you see somebody dressed up in a white robe with a white belt and a white painted face, dude, turn around and go the other way, or the curse might fall on you. Moving on. What about Guatemalan worry dolls? The indigenous people of the highlands of Guatemala created a unique version of a magic doll. According to the Mayans, worrying keeps people awake at night. In order to solve the problem of being plagued with worries and losing sleep, worry dolls were created. The dolls are small, usually between 1.5 to 2 inches tall. They are clothed in traditional Mayan costumes. The dolls are constructed with wire and wood, twisted into a frame to create the torso, legs, arms, and head. Cloth and yarn are wound around this frame to fill the doll out and to add feet and hands and hair later. Often, little woven baskets and other traditional accoutrements are added to the dolls. They are usually sold in a set of 6 to 12 dolls in cloth pouches or wooden boxes. As a remedy, when an individual is plagued with worry, They tell their worry to the dolls, one worry for each doll. The worry dolls are then placed under the pillow at night, giving the individual a peaceful night's rest. The next morning, the person awakens to discover that the dolls have taken their concerns away. A variation states that after telling the dolls your worries, you place them in their pouch or wooden box. The results are the same, with the little dolls taking troubles away. According to folklore, the origin of worry dolls lie in older stories about a magical doll that would grant a wish to the bearer. One traditional story says that a mysterious stranger, wearing a large hat, gave the secret of the dolls to a young girl, and he told her, "These dolls are yours. Tell these dolls your secret wishes. Tell them your problems. Tell them your dreams. And when you awake, you will find the magic within you to make your dreams come true." Moving across many oceans, Indonesia has a psychic doll, Nina Consuelo Epton, who lived from 1913 to 2010, was a British radio producer and broadcaster and writer, active in the 1950s and 1960s. Born in Hampstead to a Scottish father and Spanish mother, and educated in England and France, Epton traveled exclusively. She spent time in Europe, North Africa, and Indonesia. She was known to engage deeply with locals on her trips, and made it to a point to learn about local customs. Epton was especially interested in magical traditions and mysticism. On one of her journeys to the tropical island of Java in Indonesia, she found herself very compelled by the magical arts being practiced by people living in the modern Republic of Java. In her 1957 book, The Palace in the Jungle, Epton chronicled some of her experiences on Java, delving into traditions and folklore, including an experience at a Nitawang seance. Epton had become friends with a young Indonesian named Arafah, who assisted her in searching for magic on the island. It was he who approached Epton with the offer to visit a special ceremony in a small village. The Nitawang was a magical doll that Epton thought was a thing of the past. She was quite happy to have the opportunity to observe the ritual, and she says in her book, "I never would have thought that this curious custom had survived the revolution and the wave of modernism that followed it. Many more similar surprises were in store for me." It was a Thursday, or a Friday Eve, as it is called in the Javanese calendar, when Epton and the young man made their way out to the site, a kampong, or small hamlet, at the edge of a country town around 14 miles west of the city of Jakarta. The magic doll ceremony was to be conducted in a cemetery. Epton paints a picture to set the scene, and she and her guide traveled through sun-baked streets to a place shaded by huge coconut palms. Beyond the crude verandas of houses on piles and the forms of sleeping peasants in sarongs, they made their way to the back of the kampong and to the cemetery. She said, "The cemetery lay at the back of the kampong, nearly a mile from the town. It was set upon a mound like a prehistoric tumulus in the middle of gleaming rice fields. Coconut palms formed a dense canopy over this peaceful oasis, and an outer rim of camboga trees spread fragrant cream blossoms above the plain and Muslim tombstones. These cambogia trees were always associated with ceremonies in the country. They have no leaves, and the twisted branches are the most lifeless-looking objects in Java, where no tree ever shreds its foliage." Now, Epton and Arafah saw several women and girls making their way to the cemetery over the ridges that separated the surrounding rice fields. Removing her shoes, as was the custom, Epton took up a place in the procession heading to the graveyard. Her feet sank to her ankles in the soft mud of the path. Once in the cemetery, she found a group of old women under the tallest, straightest palms in the cemetery. The women were gathered together, bent over a tombstone, and were speaking in low, gravely tones. As they spoke, they worked at arranging an object at their feet, impatient and fussy the entire time. Another group, this one comprised of younger women, were seated nearby on the ground, clustered together and sitting cross-legged. They waited, with obvious excitement for the elder group to complete their preparations. The scene itself was magical, a glimpse of a tradition from the past. She said, faint wisps of incense rose from little brass bowls placed around the tombstone, which had been filled with the rose petals and pandan leaves used for offerings to gods and to the spirits of ancestors. The old women finished their work around the tombstone and gathered around the objects of their attention. Two of the women bowed their heads and began to chant a mournful incantation. The focus of the ceremonial words was now visible to all in attendance. A doll that was about to be animated by spirits called the Ni Tawang. Epton said, the doll looked as grotesque as a Guy Fawkes effigy, with its coconut shell head upon which great white eyes had been outlined in chalk. Bamboo brooms served for arms, and the bamboo frame that passed for a body was wrapped in a sarong that had been specially stolen for the occasion. I do not know why this should be so, but the Natwang must always wear a stolen garment. Epton stated that the ceremony is quite long and extensive. The group of elder women had been in the cemetery for a couple of hours before Epton herself arrived. In that time, they burned incense and recited incantations to prepare the doll and summon the spirits. It was the group of old women who determined when enough preparation had been done and the spirits were ready to enter the doll. The old women made a sign to Arafa to move forward, take the doll, and carry it down to the kampong. He took the bundle in his arms and walked ahead of the group, a strange look in his eyes as if he were in a trance. One of the elderly women jumped up and joined the group, with the sprightness of a tree squirrel, and fell in line behind Arafa. She held a mirror clutched closely to her breast. The elder women followed along behind her, continuing to chant the special incantations and carrying bowls of incense with them. Epton was on edge as the procession continued, and she said in her book, the atmosphere had become charged with electricity, as before a violent thunderstorm. All the way from the cemetery to the edge of the kampong, where Arafa stopped and laid down the doll, I had the uncomfortable feeling there was an unseen presence among us. Other people from the kampong came out of their homes and joined the ceremony now unfolding. People gathered around and in anticipation as Arafa set the doll up against the trunk of a coconut palm. Bowls of incense were arranged around the base of the tree, and silence fell over the crowd. All chanting ceased as one of the old women held the mirror in front of the stolid coconut head, which stared uncomprehendingly at its reflection. Set down in writing, cold after the event, this scene may sound absurd, but it was not. It was uncanny. Could the shadow of a passing butterfly have been responsible for the change of expression that came over the doll's coconut face? For there was no doubt it had altered. It was not a dead and inert object any longer. The lumpy, fibrous head began almost imperceptibly at first to loll first to one side and then to the other. Epton watched as the old woman with the mirror began to speak to the doll in low tones, affectionate and urging, attempting to get further response from the formerly inanimate object. As the crowd watched, the doll's head turned away from the mirror to look at the crowd of girls gathered around it. But it wasn't merely a small movement of the head. The doll's broomstick arms also began to move, twitching convulsively. Satisfied, the old woman lowered the mirror and spoke quietly to the crowd of gathered girls. The girls began to whisper among themselves until one finally raised her voice and addressed a question directly to the doll. The doll shook its head from side to side, answering the girl's question in the negative. The elder interpreted the response. The girl would not be married this year. Another girl spoke up, asking a question about her mother's health. Yes, the doll nodded. The woman would recover from her illness. Epton watched as the strange scene continued to unfold, and she said, The questions now came tumbling one after the other, and the doll rolled its head and moved its arms quicker and quicker as if inspired. Suddenly, Arafa bent over and put a question to it. "Ni Tawong," he said loudly enough for all to hear. "Ni Tawong, what new friend have we here today?" There was silence as the doll cocked its ludicrous head to one side. Then, to my horror and amazement, it bent forward and pointed one of its long, skinny broomstick arms straight at me. Everybody turned to look. Mesmerized, I stared back at the blank coconut face 20 feet away from me and felt the blood being drained from my cheeks. Ni Tawong had leant forward so abruptly that she toppled over. She remained quite still, face downwards, with arms outstretched. "She has left us. It's over," sighed one of the girls. The spirit having departed, the crowd began to disperse, returning to their homes with revelations fresh in their minds. Glasses of tea were passed around to those who remained at the cemetery. Everyone seemed to ignore the now lifeless doll that lay unmoving under the tree. Epton's mind was still reeling from her unusual experience when her companion approached her. She said in her book, "Arafa came over to sit beside me. He was laughing. 'Don't you think that final act was cute?' he said in his American English. I could not bring myself to laugh with him. In spite of the heat, I was shivering violently. 'We must be going. It's getting late,' I said. 'By the way,' cautioned Arafa, 'there's no need to tell anybody in Jakarta about Ni Tawong. They don't believe in her, you know.'" Epton's curious telling is one of the only modern accounts we have of the Ni Tawong, Indonesia's magic doll. Are these ceremonies still being performed in quiet rural areas of the country? I hope so. Perhaps at this moment, somewhere in Java, an animated doll is predicting the future. So how creepy is that? A crazy ceremony performed at a cemetery? Of course it would be a cemetery. And a lifeless doll comes to life for a few moments and asks or answers questions that people ask it. That's crazy. If it was just a trick, a parlor trick of some kind, performed back then in front of the author, how was it done, right? They were in a field. I don't know. Cool story. I like things like that. Let's talk about some famous haunted dolls. Now, of course, I'm not going to talk about the most famous like Robert the Doll or Annabelle. Let's talk about some lesser known cases of haunted dolls, like one named Claire. Check this out. In their book, Haunted Objects, Christopher Balzano and Tim Weisberg recount the story of Claire, a haunted doll owned by Jill Cole. Claire was a gift given to Jill when she was only 8 years old. The porcelain doll was a present from family friend Miss Marion. Jill wasn't a child who played with dolls very much, but she placed Claire in a child-sized rocking chair beside her at night, a place of honor, since it was a gift from an elderly woman Jill thought so much of. It turned out to be the last gift Jill received from Miss Marion, as the old woman passed away shortly after bringing Jill the doll. Jill recalls that the frightening things began to happen in short order after the doll was brought to the house. She said, "I was always uneasy with Claire. I never wanted to touch her, and when I played in my room, it was as if she were watching me. It wasn't anything to panic about, but I do remember feeling like if I did something wrong, she might actually tell on me." How ridiculous does that sound? Activity was minor at first, but soon escalated. Jill began to wake with a woman, inches from her face, shouting her name. Items began to vanish, only to be found later, laying in front of the doll. The doll itself seemed to grow more active. The terror culminated for Jill one night when she awoke to a thumping sound in her room. Looking towards the source, the corner of her room where the doll Claire sat, Jill witnessed something that haunts her to this day. As she says in her own words, staring at the doll, Jill saw its feet, which had previously been pointed in opposite directions, slowly straighten themselves until they were both pointing up. In a moment of horror that still haunts Jill's nightmares to this day, the doll turned its head towards Jill. At that moment, Jill reports 4 music boxes in her room all beginning to play at the same time. The girl screamed out, and the music stopped. Jill packed the doll away and tried to forget about the incidents. It was years later, as an adult, that Jill shared the story of the haunted doll. Tim Weisberg was able to convince the woman to let him borrow the doll so he could run some tests on it and attempt to document any paranormal activity around the item. He ran EVP sessions to no avail and also checked for EMF readings with a few results. However, on the first night that he had the doll, he took it to the studio where he recorded a show and reports a strange incident. As he states in his book and on his show, Spooky South Coast, he said, "During the show, we experienced strange double exposures of our video while it was recording, something that had never occurred before. It only happened on one of the 3 cameras we used, and I couldn't duplicate it again after the show was finished." Weisberg also reports he heard a conversation coming from his office where the doll was kept. He said, "It sounded like 2 distinct voices, male and female. When I got to the office, they stopped talking." In appearance on Spooky South Coast, Jill reports that even transporting the doll to the post office was a creepy experience. Driving with the doll in the trunk of her car, she heard a female voice. There was no radio on, and she first thought it was her phone, but she verified that it was not. There was no explanation for the source of the voice. Weisberg documented some other incidents involving the doll, including something meddling with the temperature controls in his home, and a strange scratching sound that manifested in the house. Jill also reports that Miss Marion had strange experiences with the doll. Apparently, it would move about the home on its own. Perhaps the strangest aspect of the story of Claire is that Miss Marion had no knowledge of where the doll had come from. She found it one day while cleaning out a closet and had no recall of buying it or of it being given to her. It should be noted, Miss Marion believed her house was haunted by the victims of a traffic train wreck that occurred less than a mile away from the property. The accident took place in 1900 when a train plunged into a swollen creek and 38 people lost their lives. Today, Jill has no fear of Claire, the haunted doll. In fact, she reflects on her experiences in a positive manner. She says, "Claire will always be both a special and terrifying memory from my childhood. She's the reason I believe what I believe when it comes to spirituality and helps shape my religious beliefs. She's one reason I delve into the paranormal as much as I do. I always want answers for why she is what she is, but I don't think I'll ever know." Claire is currently kept by a friend of Jill's in a haunted Victorian house in Atlanta, Georgia. The man is a voodoo priest and keeps the spirit of the doll at peace and in checks along with other spirits that fill his home. What about Mr. Creepy Seeks Miss Creepy? Have you heard of this? Nestled in the heart of downtown Seattle, a flight of steps leads to a surviving portion of the city's famous underground. A sign at street level reads, "Spooked in Seattle." And for those interested in ghosts and hauntings and the paranormal and the city's history, this site is a treasure trove. Spooked in Seattle is headquarters for the city's leading ghost tour company, as well as the home of Seattle's Death Museum. The business is also home to one of the most unsettling haunted ventriloquist dolls that has ever surfaced in recent history. The doll's previous owner, the operator of an antique store in Washington state, dubbed the figure Mr. Creepy. Now, purportedly, the creepiness of the doll could be felt on a daily basis while it was in the store. The handmade figure sat for many years on the bottom shelf of a display case in the shop. It was clear many customers found the doll unsettling, and most shoppers would ignore it or rush by in order to escape its strange gaze. It should come as no surprise that the origin of the doll are unusual and unique. In fact, the story of Mr. Creepy is a somewhat sad one. Sometime in the 1960s, an elderly and mostly forgotten ventriloquist artist from the vaudeville period was spending his retirement years making custom dolls. He occasionally displayed his well-honed ventriloquist talents at local events. showing off his handmade dolls and throwing his voice to bring them to life. In time, however, he grew too weak to continue and retired from any performing. In his twilight years, the artist made 2 very special dolls, one in his own likeness and one in the likeness of his beloved wife. Carefully crafted by his own hands, the artist made the dolls as a representation of the couple's undying love. To make the figures even more realistic, the man used he and his wife's real hair. He wanted the dolls to be as much a part of them as possible. A strange replacement for the children the couple never had. Perhaps he was trying to instill some portion of he and his wife's spirit, so their connection would be forever on display. During the couple's remaining years, the dolls never spent a day apart, just like the husband and wife they were modeled after. Sadly, in the late 1970s, a tragic accident took the lives of the couple. After passing, their possessions were sold, including the beloved handmade ventriloquist dolls. The dolls were sold as a pair, and through the years they changed hands numerous times, continuing to be sold as a couple. It was sometime in 2013 that Mr. Creepy became separated from his female counterpart. It's believed the female doll was somehow misplaced during the shuffle of moving inventory. The antique dealer has numerous storage locations, so the female doll may have ended up in the warehouse. Or perhaps she's still packed away in some of the antique store's inventory, hidden from view in a mass of vintage items. The separation may have been the impetus for Mr. Creepy's paranormal activity, since it was shortly after the separation of the 2 dolls that the store owner began to notice strange activity from Mr. Creepy. Now, reportedly, there began to be slight movements of the ventriloquist doll's head. One day, Mr. Creepy would be looking into his left. The next day, his head would be turned and he would be looking to his right. The doll was secure in its display case, so no one was accessing it or moving it about. On some mornings, the shop owner would arrive at his store to find that the doors to Mr. Creepy's case sitting wide open. Was the doll roaming the store at night in search of his missing mate? Enter Ross Allison, a well-known ghost hunter and head of the Spooked in Seattle, who came across Mr. Creepy and the strange tale connected to him while visiting the antique store. When he asked the owner if he would be willing to part with Mr. Creepy, there was not a moment's hesitation, and the odd ventriloquist doll was off to his new residence at Spooked in Seattle, a welcome part of the haunted doll collection held by the museum. Mr. Creepy was placed on display in a protective glass case in a public area of Spooked in Seattle. Not long after Mr. Creepy had been transported to his new home, another one of Spooked in Seattle's owners heard a loud bang on one of the glass cases in the main area. Inspecting the display area, the man found Mr. Creepy leaning his head forward against the glass case. Surprised by his discovery, the man took a picture of the doll in its new placement. A later review of the photo revealed a strange anomaly. What appears to be a lifelike face of a man instead of a doll's face. Was the spirit of Mr. Creepy becoming more active? With his most recent move to Seattle, it seems Mr. Creepy is still looking for his lost companion. Many of the staff members at Spooked in Seattle have witnessed him turning his head from time to time and changing his position in the display case, which he has kept. While there are other purportedly haunted items at this location, none seem to be as unusual or as strange as the ventriloquist doll. Apparently, the restless spirit attached to the doll is still looking for his bride. Allison says that the antique store owner remains on the lookout for the elusive Miss Creepy, so they can be reunited. Perhaps at some point she'll be found, and the dolls can be back together. Will it quell the spirit? Perhaps someday Allison and the Spooked in Seattle staff will have a chance to see what happens when the 2 dolls are brought back together. In the meantime, Mr. Creepy remains on display at the Seattle business, no doubt keeping a close eye on everyone and everything that comes through the door, waiting and hoping for the return of his love. I got one more for you before we get out of here. Check this out. Australian Kerry Walton grew up in Wagga Wagga, New South Wales. There was an old abandoned house on the street where he spent his childhood years. Kerry and his friends avoided the place, adhering to the popular legend that the old building was haunted, and hence dangerous. Walton grew up and left his hometown, starting a life of his own elsewhere in Australia. It was 1972 when he found himself returning to his hometown. Sadly, the visit was due to the death of Kerry's grandmother and the funeral services he went to attend. There on the street, he recalled so fondly, sat the abandoned house, still as dilapidated as he remembered, though in his adulthood, it was not as frightening. Curiosity and perhaps the need to confront his childhood fear drove Kerry to visit the old house during his time at home. Flashlight in hand, he pierced the darkness of the crumbling structure. One of his hobbies was collecting vintage bottles, and Walton thought that this old place could yield a treasure trove for his collection. He made his way through the house carefully, mindful of the risky conditions, and searched the dark nooks and crannies, hoping to make a discovery. He would end up with much more than he bargained for. Having no luck finding the items in the rooms of the house, Kerry decided to expand his search and venture under the home itself. It was there, while pushing through the dust and dirt of the decrepit building, that Walton suddenly saw a face peering back at him through the cobwebs. Shocked and startled, he jerked back, almost knocking himself out as his head slammed into a floor beam above him. At first, Kerry thought he had stumbled upon the body of a dead child. He aimed his flashlight at the figure, bracing himself for the unsettling possibility of such a grim discovery, only to find he had discovered not a decomposing human body, but a doll. As Walton reached out and retrieved the doll, he discovered its clothing was crumbling and falling away. He wondered how the wooden doll had survived for so long, stuck under this home. For that matter, he wondered how and why the doll had even ended up under there of this old abandoned house in the first place. Inspecting the figure, Walton was surprised to discover that the hair on the doll was made from real human hair. However, his real surprise came when he realized that the doll's scalp could be removed to reveal a brain inside the head of the figure. Intrigued by his unusual find, Kerry decided to leave the house and take the antique doll with him. After his grandmother's funeral services, Walton bid farewell to Wagga Wagga and set off for the journey home. He had driven to the town along with his brother, and the two of them would also make the return trip together. Kerry packed his bags and tossed the strange doll into an old travel bag and threw it in the back of the van along with his other luggage. As the brothers started to return trip, Kerry relaxed in the passenger seat and tried to get some sleep while his brother drove. Sometime later, Kerry was awoken by his brother nudging him. There were strange sounds coming from the back of the van, and his brother was disturbed. The noises, it seemed, were coming from the old travel bag containing the doll. Looking into the back of the van, it appeared to the two brothers that the doll was moving around on its own, perhaps trying to escape the confines of the bag that held it. Kerry tried to brush the situation off and to put his brother at ease. He took over at the wheel, completing the rest of the drive by himself. The odd sounds continued behind him the entire time, making the already long drive a nerve-wracking experience. Once he reached home, Kerry opened the bag to inspect the doll, unsure of what he would find. Despite the weird sounds during the trip, everything seemed normal with the doll and the bag. Perhaps it had all been a case of overreactive imagination. Walton took the doll inside, ready to show his find to his family. However, when his dog saw the creepy doll, the animal became vicious, growling and barking hysterically at the figure. It wasn't just the animals in the home that reacted to the doll. Kerry's family complained about the doll and said it seemed to always be looking at them with the cold and dark eyes. Guests who stopped by the Walton home to pay a visit hated seeing the doll. Many of them would scream out when he saw its presence. Each person stated they found the doll extremely disturbing. Walton's children tried playing with the doll. During the daytime, things were fine. However, at night, the doll frightened them. and they could be heard screaming and complaining about it watching them. Fear caused the family to keep the figure at a safe distance. Carrie decided it would be best to store the doll under his house. He tucked it away and tried to forget about it. On occasion, however, the family would awaken in the middle of the night hearing a voice screaming out from beneath the house in a chilling tone, and it cried, "Let me out, let me out." Walton began to call the doll Let, and a month after his trip, the discovery of the doll, Walton learned that the old abandoned home had been torn down. He found it odd timing since the house had stood for well over 200 years. If he hadn't taken the time to explore it when he did, Let the doll would never have been found, and likely would have been destroyed during the demolition of the building. Walton now believes the doll itself may have called him to rescue it. 5 years passed by, and the Waltons decided to sell their home. Needing money for the purchase of a new house, Carrie elected to retrieve the doll and try to sell it. It was obvious to Carrie the doll was very old, and he felt it might have some value as an antique or a collectible. He decided to take Let to a museum in Sydney to see if he could get any further information. He put the doll in his chair and headed to the museum. What was supposed to be a day of clear, sunny skies suddenly became a rainy downpour. Walton would come to learn that whenever Letta is taken outside, rain inevitably begins to pour. Carrie made it to the museum and spoke with officials. On examination, experts at the Sydney Museum determined the doll was between 170 and 200 years old, based mainly on the age of the nails used in the doll's shoes. From their inspection of the figure, officials also came to believe that the doll was the work of a Romanian gypsy craftsman. The gypsies of that period were known to utilize effigies for a process they called spirit transference, a technique wherein the souls of the recently departed would possess dolls as homes. Armed with his new historical knowledge about the doll, including its age and rarity, Walton listed the item for sale in hopes of getting a large amount of money from it. In short order, the offer was made and a sale price agreed on. Although Carrie was ready to sell the doll, Let was not done with the Walton family. The doll's strange power was about to show itself again. Walton set out to make the transaction and be rid of the creepy doll. As before, once he took Let out and got into his car, the skies opened and rain began to pour. Things got very strange when Carrie arrived at the buyer's home. He found himself paralyzed and unable to even get out of his vehicle. Frozen in place, Walton sat for what felt like hours, chills running up and down his back. He knew it was the influence of the doll, and that he wouldn't be able to get out of his car. After a time, Walton resolved in his mind that he would keep the doll. He was then, instantly, able to move enough to pull away from the buyer's home. As he continued driving away, Walton discovered the paralysis had left his body. The doll quickly attracted the attention of the media, and Carrie and his strange doll began making appearances on television shows, and every crew that encountered the doll felt uneasy around it and had bizarre experiences thereafter. Some experienced fear, others overwhelming sadness when in the doll's presence. Walton and Let made the rounds, appearing on numerous talk shows. One host of a popular daytime program arranged a meeting between the doll and a highly regarded psychic. The doll arrived on a rainy day at the psychic's office. A painting immediately fell off the wall, and a clock on the office stopped. The psychic took the doll and held it in her lap. A film crew documented the interaction that unfolded as the doll's head slowly started to turn on its own accord. Everyone in the room saw the movement and heard the sounds of Let's wooden neck creaking with the turn. It was far too much for one of the cameramen in attendance, who turned completely white and ran out of the door. The psychic said she could feel the presence of a child trapped inside the antique doll. She claimed the spirit was of that of a 6-year-old boy who had drowned during a storm in Romania. It was the boy's grieving father who had fashioned the doll himself and had his son's soul transferred into the wooden figure. The psychic further believed the child had remained confused and frightened throughout the centuries. She believed it was an Australian immigrant who was responsible for bringing the doll to Wagga Wagga. and placing it under the old house where Carrie Walton later discovered it. Well, folks, that's about all for today. This is really starting to creep me out. Let's take a break. You're listening to Expanded Perspectives. And we're back with Expanded Perspectives. Man, I don't know what it is about dolls, but they are creepy, especially when you see these antiquated,
they're just
Victorian-looking dolls. And for whatever reason, ventriloquist dolls are even scarier, right?
Oh, God, yes.
That's like on another level of scary. I don't know why. They're just creepy.
Now, Luke is always like Chucky.
Oh, yeah, he's a big Chucky fan.
Right? Like it doesn't faze him at the least.
Not the least. But then you can find like some Walt Disney cartoon and he'd be terrified of it. I never have understood that.
So crazy.
In fact, I think there's a new Chucky series coming out on Hulu or something. Or maybe it was the Sci-Fi Channel.
You'll be about it.
I saw a commercial the other day, but I was only kind of half paying attention.
I'm sorry, what?
My wife's grandmother is a huge Chucky fan.
Really?
Big time. In fact, we went to the Spirit Halloween store here in town. I know, shocker. And they had a Chucky wine mug. Not wine, coffee mug. And I bought it for her grandmother and gave it to her like 2 weeks ago, and she loved it.
A Chucky cup.
Yeah, a Chucky mug. They had all kinds of stuff there, but it's pretty cool.
Now,
if you haven't been.
Do we have any updates on what Little Fizzy is going to be for Halloween?
No. He's already changed it twice, but both things I have no idea what they were. See, his biggest flaw now.
So the problem is like you're too old to even know what he's talking about.
Yeah,
I got you.
His flaw now is he's picking like obscure references that he saw on YouTube, but I'm like, brother, that is so obscure, no one's gonna know what that is.
Yeah, but
maybe I'm wrong. Maybe a lot of people know what it is. I'm just too dumb. I don't know what it is.
You're just out of touch.
So I don't know. It's still early. It's still September, so we got a ways. He'll probably pick something out a week before.
You're not as hip as you used to be, man.
No,
not that we were to start with, but no. I mean, just like we're even less so now.
That's
the whole thing.
Absolutely true. But you know what is hip is stories about time slips.
Oh, Lord. Have you got a good one?
Check this out.
Okay, hit me with it.
It says, are you familiar with the Custer Battlefield in Montana?
Yes.
Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument. Just to put things in perspective, I'm 65 years old now, and this took place in the early 90s. And I don't do it so much anymore. I used to have a Dodge van, and on vacation time, I would always throw a futon in the back of it, a sleeping bag, my Coleman camping stuff, and I'd hit the road for 2 or 3 weeks and just go visit places.
You'd write free candy and hugs on the side of it.
One trip, I went back east. I'm from Ohio, and I've lived in Monterey, California now for the last 40 years. And I visit Civil War battlefields. I've been to Antietam, Gettysburg, Harper's Ferry. And on one trip, I went up to see Custer's Mountain up there in Montana. And where it is, it's up there in the prairies, and it's surrounded by a lot of mountains. It is small. It's on the intersection of State 90 and U.S. Route 212, which goes east and west. It's a little east of Billings, Montana. And 212 starts at 90 and runs right behind Custer's Hill and goes to Spearfish, Sturgis, Deadwood, that part of the country. Anyway, so I'm on the road for 4 or 5 days already on this trip, and I'm tired, and I need to take a shower or jump in a river somewhere. I get to the park at 8 o'clock at night. It's already closed, so I'm not going to go in and see the monument that night. I was also really hungry. Now, down where this was at is this little general store that has a cafe in it. So I pulled in the parking lot right there, and they were getting ready to close. It was this guy and his wife, and the guy was a retired park ranger who used to take people out on tours of the monument, so he knew it really well. And his wife was a Native American, and she lived there her whole life and her whole family for generations too. And after the battle, the Native Americans just didn't go away. They are all still around there and to this day. Anyways, so they make me something to eat, and I asked them if they happened to have a beer I could drink. And they said no. They said, go up the road a couple of miles to this little town called Crow Agency, buy a 12-pack and bring it back, and we'll help you drink it. So I did just that. I went up there and I got a 12-pack, and I brought it back. And for the next couple hours, they told me the true story of Custer's battle, and it was really riveting. Parts of the story you never heard of. It wasn't like Errol Flynn dying on the hill like in the movies. It was a long, drawn-out battle. It was multifaceted. There were other parts of the battle, other sections of the battle. Anyways, they were getting ready to close up. They had to go home. I asked them if I could camp out in their parking lot. They said no. I couldn't do that, but there's a little access road off of Route 212 about a mile down the road, and it's a dirt road due to maintenance of the park, and you can pull into that spot and nobody will bother you. I said, that sounds great. So I went down the road. I found the spot and backed into it, turned off the van, and it was dark, starry, and it was quiet. And it was just out here in the prairies. It was amazing. It wasn't eerie at all. It was just neat, right? And it was dark and it was starry. So I rolled back into my sleeping bag and I went to sleep. And I was out like a light. So it must have been a couple hours later. I'm sleeping. I guess I'm sleeping. Maybe I'm dreaming. I hear this noise. Back of my mind, small, ethereal. I'm hearing men shouting. I'm hearing horses. I'm hearing gunshots. I'm laying there thinking, man, you got to be dreaming. You know how when you're in REM sleep, you can't move? And it comes in and it's getting louder and louder and it's getting louder. Now I'm waking up and I'm hearing this and I'm sitting up, so I know that I'm not asleep. I said, oh my God, was that a bad dream? But it didn't go away. It kept getting louder. I looked at my hands and I'm like, I'm really hearing this. I'm awake. I'm hearing this. What is this? I throw open the side doors of the van. I jump out and there's nothing. Absolutely nothing. It's just dark. It's starry and a little cool, but the sound is still going on. Horses and gunshots and men. I'm still hearing this. And then it slowly started fading away and then it was gone. The whole episode probably lasted only 3 minutes. The whole rest of the night, I crawled back in the van. I sat there wrapped in my sleeping bag, completely spooked. The next day, I went in and visited the park, but I left again that night. It was the weirdest thing I've ever experienced. Do you think I experienced a time slip, Dennis? I don't know, but that's a cool story, right? You're at a historic battlefield and you're hearing the battle.
That's wild.
He didn't see anything.
Just heard it.
But he could hear it clearly. So like you talked about earlier with the giant sloths, is it like some kind of memory that's like replaying itself, but it's not 100% replaying? Like, oh, it was audio only as far as he could tell. You know, when he woke up the next day, there was nothing there.
It just makes me wonder too, though, like, were you fully awake? Are you not sure you weren't asleep and dreaming or thinking, or especially with all the stories that you were just told?
Well, you're absolutely right.
I'm not saying it's not a time slip. I'm just saying that's a possibility.
Well, and he's not saying it's a time slip.
Exactly.
He's wanting to know, right. So it's just a weird
It is odd that it happened there.
Yeah, let's leave it at that. It's a weird experience.
It's a very weird experience.
I would like to travel around and visit those Civil War battle sites. I think that would be really cool.
To go see all of it?
Yeah. And we could do our metal detecting. Maybe we'd find some musket balls that hit each other. And stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Well, they do metal detecting all around those things.
Yeah, I'm sure that everything's been picked up.
We're just slowly getting older, and
I do have a cannon
into it.
We do have a cannon.
We do have it. We need to get that down and take some photos of that.
You want to do a reenactment?
We might as well.
I guess you'll have to be from the South. I guess I'll take the Union side since my whole family's from the North.
We're just going to get the cannon out and shoot it. We're not going to shoot it at each other.
No, I'm not talking about shooting at each other, but just pose for pictures. It would look cool.
It's funnier whenever
I don't want to show my kids how to use a cannon because I don't want them to do the same stuff we did.
Exactly. Yeah, you got to be real careful on how you teach like cannon etiquette too, right? Like you're like, I don't know.
I'm not even sure it's legal to own. I mean, like the ATF. I mean, I'm waiting on a couple suppressors right now. They don't need to know that I have a cannon. They might revoke that crap. Why is it so hard to get a muffler for your gun? Like, I don't get it. It's just so you don't have to buy headphones. Like, why does it take 12 months?
It's not
to put a muffler on my gun.
Two of the biggest misunderstood things: suppressors for firearms and 12 to 6 elbows.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, it doesn't. Do they think that? Like, it gives you some kind of ability to be an assassin if you have a suppressor?
You've seen James Bond. You know how quiet they are?
Oh, I love the sound where it sounds like a laser. Yeah, I'd be like, no, dude, what are you talking about?
Like, no, it doesn't work like that.
Sounds like somebody cracking a bullwhip.
Yeah.
It's loud.
It doesn't work that way. It is pretty wild, though, to think about, like, if something, that kind of memory could be left at one of these places of heavy tragedy, like we've covered.
Yeah, right.
Like, it to me, it makes sense.
I agree.
Because it's almost like an emotional stain in that area. And I just feel like it's just, to me, it's not surprising to think about there being sound or there being something left that, you can't pass over, you can't cross over, you can't leave it. Just the way everything went down.
Right. Like if you went to the beaches of Normandy on a certain night at a certain time, could you hear like machine gun fire and stuff? That'd be crazy.
That would be crazy. That would be crazy. Hey, look, I know that we've talked about chupacabra in the past. I got a chupacabra story here, Lon fired over, just because simply of the title again, it's a possible bug chupacabra down in Paraguay. Yeah. Okay. Get a load of this. It says, hello, sir. I don't know if you were aware of this incident from the spring of 2018. The event affected all the inhabitants of a ranch located in the town of Los Cedrales, Paraguay, in the department of the Alto Paraná. The cold nights forced the inhabitants of the Manuela Ranch to shut themselves up early, but the tranquility broke at around 9:30 p.m. on the Saturday night, when the guardian of the establishment, a little dog, would not stop barking. The administrator, Francisco Molinas, came out to look at him with his rifle and flashlight, and then he went to investigate the reason for the alarm towards the place where the sheep slept. I went to look behind the shed, and I saw one of the largest sheep lying on the ground. There I found out that there was every wound in the neck. I shone my flashlight to a corner, and there I saw the bug with its red eyes. It was brownish in color. In total, the bug killed 6 goats. The man reacted to the initial scare and said, I got 3 shots with my rifle. I shouted to my son, and he brought my 9mm pistol, and he had the animal hemmed up at about 70 meters out there. Just when he stayed, that's what it says, I emptied the magazine of my gun and 16 shots. Then I lit him with the line, and there he turned, I'm assuming with the line, I'm guessing his flashlight, something like that. He turned around and came straight to attack me. I reached my son and my partner, who brought a shotgun.
Now you're talking.
Now we're not messing around. All right. The bug did not run so hard, and they put him against a volley of shots until he got into a little hill of the ranch. We looked for him everywhere. Too much. We wanted to hunt him to show people this monster. I did not believe in this before, but now that I've seen it, I know there's a chupacabra.
Wow.
So the way they describe it, though, is bug-like.
Bug-like. And seeing when you go to like Puerto Rico, it's like more reptilian-like.
Yeah, but a bug makes sense to me. You think about a giant bug attacking like a sheep or something along those lines.
Especially in Paraguay.
Exactly.
I mean, that's next to Brazil, so it's by the Amazon, makes sense.
It was a giant Amazonian chupacabra bug, and that's what it is. It's just draining things out there. It just makes sense to me. I just like the idea of a bug attacking stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Creepy.
Terrible.
Creepy. Cam, what do you got planned for the rest of your week?
We're getting ready for opening day of bow season. My daughter comes home this weekend. I haven't seen her in almost 2 months, aside, of course, from FaceTiming and all that. So she'll be home. That's about it. Just getting stuff prepared for all of that thing, and really, really hoping for cooler weather.
Yeah, man. I agree. I don't really have much going on either. Just hoping the weather gets better. Before we get out of here, if you have any cool stories, any insectoid chupacabras, any giant sloths or creepy dolls or anything else you want to share with the group, please do not hesitate. You can email the show, expandedperspectives@yahoo.com. You can call the show, 888-393-2783. Let's not forget about our amazing sponsors. If you want to take ownership of your health, try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/expanded. That's drinkag1.com/expanded. Also, Fume. Join Fume in accelerating humanity's breakup from destructive habits by picking up the Journey Pack today. Head to tryfume.com. That's tryfum.com. Use the code EXPANDED to get 10% off when you'll get your order today. Also, Z-Biotics. Pre-alcohol probiotic is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. Go to zbiotics.com/expanded. Let me spell that for you. That's ZBIOTICS.com/expanded. skeleton.com/expanded to get 15% off your first order when you use the code expanded at checkout. I hope everybody out there has a fantastic week. Till next time, folks, that's all the time we have today for here at Skeleton Studios. Be safe. I'm Kyle. He's Camp.
Peace, y'all.